Well, the one thing Alex did tell me is if you have a scoop, it should take you so that way it's on full screen. And you can see the bottom. For you, yeah.
That's what we did last
Yeah.
time. Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah. Alex showed me that last time.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that, the rack right here, the full impression.
That was like, wow. I know that right here. Yeah. Yeah, it was you. Sit in the back of the class. What's going on?
Pretty sunny.
It is a nice day. I left my phone at home, so I don't have any entertainment. Yeah. Yeah, the place is drive down.
Right now.
I come down from Victor.
Oh, I was just gonna ask where you. Okay. So yeah, Victor's, that's not. Nice drive. It's not bad.
About a half hour
Yeah, no, it's not bad at all.
to get into Missoula.
Oh, Kelly, is this one of your new outfits?
The shoes are. Trying not to overdo it. The shoes are more surgery, but that's like. I didn't have strength and everything.
I almost ate one of my meals fresh.
Oh, what did you have? One for dinner? What do you guys have?
It was a buffalo, they took a buffalo, which was really good size, thick and big, and then they put mashed potatoes on top of that, and they put mushroom.
I'm Eric. I'm an alcoholic. And it is an honor and a privilege to be at Immediate Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's been a real, pleasure to sponsor Justin over the past almost year now. And not quite, but almost a year. And he actually wanted to get up here and speak today. So I wonder if he's been restored to sanity yet. But you know, I've had the privilege of working with a lot of guys in Alcoholics Anonymous, and quite frankly, very, very few of them do what he has done. You know, very few of them has taken the steps, have taken a searching and fearless moral inventory, talked to me about all the stuff he wasn't going to talk about ever, and set aside his false alcoholic pride long enough to make a list of people he'd harmed and actually went and made amends, and so it's he's had his spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous or used and you're looking for a sponsor, I would highly recommend Justin. And with that, that's all I have.
Thanks.
I'm Justin. I'm an alcoholic. It's the finest group of sick people I've seen all day. Yeah, so my name is Justin, and my sobriety date is June 24th, 2023. I've got 652 days all in a row sober from alcohol, which always wasn't the case. I got some advice from some people, and they, about what to say, how to say it. I watched a few of these. Welcome to all my friends on Zoom, my friends from the Band of Brothers meetings. I'll get to that. And the first step, that we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. That one took a while. I was raised by, a mom for the first 8.5 years, three brothers, three different dads. None of them stuck around. And I didn't know my dad until I was 8.5 years old, and I met him in a treatment center. And he is Genesis House in Seattle. It was a behavior modification center, and so recovery was always around. He joined Narcotics Anonymous and is still clean and sober to this day. He's got 31 years. And so I was, when I met him, going to meetings was a thing. As a kid, I was going to meetings with him. And then as a teenager, starting to get into trouble, when I got in trouble, it was like, you got to go to meetings. So I was told I was a drug addict and alcoholic from an early age. And I didn't quite believe it. It was, John Barleycorn hadn't done its work yet. And so I tried the program, in high school. I was raised in Washington. And in high school, I was clean and sober through most of high school. Actually, my first speaking engagement was at a camp out as a young person in sobriety, and how I did it. And I remember I invited a gal who would turn out to be my girlfriend. I was like, hey, you should come see me speak. And well, a month later, she's like, you'd be funner if you drank. Yeah. And so within a month, this same gal was like, what happened to that guy? What happened to that guy that was doing these things and had an upward trajectory? Like, why do you just want to get messed up all the time? And I didn't have an answer at the time. And so that went on for a couple years. I got a few jobs, lost a few jobs, never due to alcohol. I just would get these resentments, and I didn't know what a resentment was, so I didn't know how to deal with it. And then I would go on to the next thing. And I got sober again. I kind of felt at the time, I knew, I'm a smart alcoholic. I was like, I think if I admit I have a problem to my employer, they can't fire me for at least like 90 days. And so I did that, went to treatment. I think it was a 21-day program. I made it 19. Fell in love with a married woman. Didn't work out. And I stayed sober. I stayed sober for a little bit, but I stayed sober for probably 18 months. I remember a 19-month mark, but I stayed sober just by going to the rooms. There was a room in Edgewood, Washington, that I had a few buddies that we'd play poker with, and we would play poker, and that was it. And we'd go to the meetings. It was kind of a social club. I never did any of the work. I got a sponsor so I could say I have a sponsor, because I seemed to fit in better when people asked you if you had a sponsor. I wanted to be able to say yes, and so I had one. And I kind of dabbled in the steps and kind of dabbled in the book, meaning I'd had a book, and it was in my back seat throughout the week. But on Sundays, I would show up and we'd read the doctor's opinion. I'd hear things about all these big words I didn't understand. And then I would take my book and I'd throw it in the back seat and keep on my merry way. I left my job. I was selling cars at the time. I've always been a salesman, and I started doing subprime refis during the mortgage boom. If you were in Washington, you had your house repossessed from guys like me. My parents never had a mortgage. I didn't even know what a mortgage was, let alone buying a house and stuff, but I could sell stuff. And so at 19 months sober, I made a lot of money, and I didn't know how to spend it, didn't know how to take care of the God-sized hole in my heart. And I thought, I have arrived. Like Bill talks about in his story, I have arrived. I had a fast stack of cash, and I paid a friend to help me move, and we were at a Japanese steakhouse in Federal Way, Washington. He ordered a drink, and I said, I'll take one too. And I didn't plan to have a drink that morning. I didn't, but I wasn't doing the program. I drifted from the meetings. I drifted from calling my sponsor. I drifted to doing the things that had gotten me there. I drank, and I remember that first drink, and then an obsession to drink the second one. You know, it wasn't a choice whether I was going to or not. It was a choice of, can I make myself look okay before I order my second one? And that triggered, you know, a 15-year drinking spell that you know, I lost the jobs. I went to treatments. I got the DUIs that I'd never gotten before. You know, I've got a couple convictions, couple, you know, slipped out ofs. Never killed nobody, you know, thank goodness. I think that's my higher power looking out for me. And you know, and up until then, you know, I always thought I was smart enough to control alcohol. I thought that because I had a job, I woke up hungover and went to that job and gave 50% effort and got 30% of the results I was capable of, that was manageability. You know, I hadn't seen what later on I would come to see as the deathly effects of alcohol. And so it was you know, I moved around a lot. I would rented rooms from people, stayed on people's couches, would have a little bouts of sobriety here and there, like the book describes, and think I had it. And then as soon as I took that first drink, I was off and running again. There was no control in it. You know, it was, I was either drinking and burning things down, or I was sober. You know, and looking back, you know, had I done the program the first time, I don't know if it would have worked. You know, like I said earlier, you know, it takes what it takes. Takes what it takes to do the work and to have the gift of desperation to do it. So, you know, I moved to Seattle, Washington, and, you know, all this time I had never had a meaningful relationship because, you know, I guess, you know, it was only a matter of time before I drank in front of the person that I was trying to impress, and who would want to date that? But it was good for other things. And so then I met someone who would later become my wife, and we moved to Missoula, Montana. And that's where, you know, marrying an alcoholic, as an alcoholic, is an alcoholic's dream. You know, for the first time we, yeah, you know, no longer I had to worry about, you know, being drunk and making amends the next morning. It was like, all right, let's reset and do it again, because as long as we had alcohol, things seemed to work out. We moved here, had been only dated for a few months, and we kind of came to an agreement. You know, she does everything at the house, cooking, cleaning, washing the dishes. I would go to work and provide for it. And she, you know, she got me on the dishes. I was like, "You'll do the dishes? All right, I'll do whatever." You know, you do the dishes, and it worked for a while. You know, I did things like we would have delicious meals, cook you know, Ethiopian food, or celebrate on Christmas and Thanksgiving, and do the things that I had never done with another person and growing up. You know, growing up with you know, we when my mom got divorced, the first time, you know, I remember decorating a fake tree with Christmas lights. And you know, I moved school 7 times, so nothing was really stable. But I found stability in this relationship, and I found a team. But it was just us. You know, there was 2-person dance parties. There was, you know, mowing the lawn, all this domesticated stuff that I thought was going to make me happy. And then that changed. It, you know, I've been here 10 years in Missoula, and I love it. I call it home. We moved, you know, the isolation for the both of us started. I got a new job. She was in her alcoholism too. You know, what I recognize as resentment, fear, guilt, shame, and remorse. She lived in it. And she, and it changed, you know, which leads me to the second step. You know, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So I came into the rooms with a little bit of desperation, but a little bit of resentment, and I would call a negative balance towards this thing called higher power. I thought not only was he not going to do nothing for me, he had it out for me. My wife passed away on January 4th, 2023 from chronic alcoholism. 6 months leading up to that, I was not only a full-time alcoholic, full-time worker, but a full-time caregiver. What it's like to die from this disease is something I hope none of us ever have to go through. You know, those that have worked in the hospital setting know what it looks like, and we didn't even have that chance. You know, she would not. You know, the book describes it and how it works, that many of us, not some, not a few, many of us go on to the bitter end. And she chose that way. And she died 151 days before I got sober. And so, you know, my alcoholic thinking was, you know, not only as I go through this process of, you know, that I'd never been through before, probate and other things, cremation, was, all right, you know, when can I start drinking? When can I start drinking? Because now I got the golden excuse. You know, I'm a 39-year-old widow. Nobody's going to tell me that, hey, Justin, you're drinking too much, because I have the excuse, you know, in my back pocket, you know. And for a few days, I kept it together. I knew I had to, I knew I had to get through the stuff, through the appointments and explaining what happened. So I kept it together, and I was put in a hotel, and she died on a Wednesday. On that Saturday, you know, granted, my whole family's back in Washington. You know, it was just me and her here. And I went over to the gas station out on Expressway, and I got I think probably a 12-pack. Maybe, I think it might have been a 6-pack, but I started, I cracked a beer and top to bottom, cracked another beer top to bottom. And I knew I was going to drink myself to death, because I had been in the hospital. September, she died in January. I was in September 11th. I was in the hospital for pancreatitis for 3 days. And they told me, if you keep drinking like you're going to drink, you're going to die within a year. And it didn't sink in. You know, I had these mental gymnastics, left and right. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop drinking. Then it became, I'm only going to drink one beer, you know? So I'm getting picked up from the hospital after a 3-day stay on morphine and other things. And I'm like, okay, I can handle one beer a day. You know, no more vodka, no more Fireball, but this one beer, I can handle that. And so, of course, like the good alcoholic, I went and got the tallest beer possible, the strongest beer. I'm like, if I only have one can, and that didn't last long. That lasted a few days before I was taking slugs off the vodka bottle again. And so, you know, yeah. And so I came to this program, and they, you know, 151 days is what it took me, where I couldn't show up for work, or I would show up, make sure everything was okay, and then use sick time, you know. And I would say, hey, I would say, hey, I'm grieving, I gotta go home. Really, I just wanted to go home and drink. That's what I wanted to do. I had a couple friends who I've made amends with since then that would just come over maybe on a Sunday to make sure I was still, you know, kind of a welfare check. And I just kept on drinking. And then when I kind of felt the time at work that I wasn't, you know, my boss had shown up enough times and I wasn't there, that they were probably going to be letting me go. And I'd been at this company for 6 years. I'm in management, and I knew I needed some help. And, you know, I just didn't have an answer. I had sworn off alcohol every single day for years, every single day in the morning. You know, I was like, today's going to be different. And it was never different. You know, by noon, I started to feel a little better. By 2, I was talking myself way into it. And then, you know, I was the type of alcoholic to go to work, stop at the liquor store, get a daily amount, because it was known that if I got too much, I would drink it all. I never had the off switch. And the whole time, I mean, the years and years and years of drinking, I don't think I ever once drank my fill. Never got enough. And I'd pass out, but I never got enough. And so, I got sober on a Saturday, went to the hospital. Well, actually back up about a week. On a Monday, I was calling. I called a gal named Angie from my company. I'd been selected for a council because I have some talents in sales. And I was one of, and we were supposed to do this presentation to one of the C-level employees. And I had basically bailed out of the first meeting, and I called her and I said, I'm going to get the help that I need. And my next call was to a therapist. He was a substance abuse counselor, grief therapist, and he had been waiting for my call. A friend of his was a friend of mine, and he said he'll call me when he's ready. And so I called him, met with him on that Thursday, and he's like, he took one look at me, and he's like, well, you got to quit drinking. And I was like, yeah, no shit. Like, look at me, I was 50 pounds lighter than I am right now, size 29 waist, and 6 months from death. I was 6 months from death, and that was on a good day. And so on that Saturday, I don't know if it was God's will. Actually, I know now it was God's will. It was God's will in that hotel room when I got to that third beer, and I called my stepmom and I said, you need to send Dad over here. When I was in the hotel a couple of days after Janine died, I said, you need to send Dad over here. I'm not doing too good. And he came over and he did some things with me to clean out the room she passed away in, get the carpet, get the pad, get the mattress, all that stuff out to the dump. I found liquor in the, I had it hidden all over the house. So I found some. And when I went to the dump to dump her stuff, I was, had a couple drinks in me, and he smelt it and he knew I was, but, I think that was an act of God there. And it was an act of God getting into the rooms because, I've since made amends, like Eric talked about, and I'll get to that, about, this drive back with my dad. We had spent a couple days together. My wife had just passed away, and he had a friend with him from the program that I'd known since I was 12 years old. We had gone on a fishing trip. So here is 20 years later, a little bit longer than that, this kid that was just a kid going on a fishing trip, and his wife just died from alcoholism, and he's going to die too. And I talked to my dad about that, about how that drive must have been like, knowing that may have been the last time that he ever saw me alive. And he, like a good recovering person, was like, it's just one day at a time. And I was like, okay. So that was an act of God. And the second act of God was me going to the hospital. They gave me something to keep the edge off the first couple of days, and I paced my house. Being alone like that, I did get a grief dog. That's one good thing to come out of this. I have a little dog named Ginger. She's an Irish Terrier. I was watching her the day Janine passed, and she was dropped off the day I got back from the hotel, and we've been with each other ever since. She has seen some stuff. She saw some crying and some yelling and some frustrating, some swearing and cursing to God. But I thought I could do it on my own. I thought I had gathered this wealth of knowledge. Growing up in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought I knew how this program worked. I'd never done the work myself, but I thought I could osmosisly absorb this stuff. And I was like, oh, Dad, you're just going to be my sponsor. Yeah, anything comes up, I'll call you. And luckily it doesn't work that way. And he was smart enough to tell me it doesn't work that way. And so on Tuesday, I had 3-4 days sober. And on Tuesday night, I'd gone online. I'm like, I'm going to try this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous again. And I went on the Missoula Oasis Persist group. And if anyone is here that night, it was the birthday meeting of 2023 of June. I signed on, and a friend of mine was playing video games, and I was like, oh, this is great. When you don't want to hear the speaker, you just turn it down, and then you just turn it back up. And then they were like, that's crosstalk. We don't allow that here. And I'm like, holy shit, is my mic on? You know, like, and I hung up. And and then, you know, the next night I was like, I'm gonna try that again. And so I went on to this website, you know, it's Googled Missoula AA, and there wasn't a Missoula Oasis Persist group starting at 7 o'clock. But I had worked in Kalispell. My job had taken me up there a couple times, so I clicked on Kalispell. And there was a meeting in Kalispell going on called the Band of Brothers. And it had started at 6:30. And granted, it's just 7 o'clock. And so I was like, you know, I'm just gonna click on this here, sit in the back. Hopefully it's like 100 people and nobody will notice me and I'll hear something that saves my life. So I clicked on and clicked my camera on and my microphone on and came a half an hour into the Band of Brothers meeting. And there were 4 guys. 4 men. Yep. Yep. And, you know, and these guys, you know, took one look at me. 50 pounds underweight, not sleeping, suffering from grief. And they knew what to do. They knew what to do. They shared their experience, they shared their strength, and they shared their hope. And they said, let's exchange phone numbers. I talked to one that night, and his name is Matt, and talked and gave my phone number to a gentleman named Larry who's on here. Hi, Larry. Good to see you. And Larry, you know, I talked to Matt that night, and he didn't say you have to call me every day. He said, you can call me tomorrow if you want. And I said, okay. And Larry said, let me get you in connection with somebody that I know from Missoula. Here's his number. And it, you know, instead of thinking I knew how this program worked because I'd been around it since I was before a teenager, instead of, you know, trying to do it JA, it's what I call Justin Anonymous. It's when I want to do things that aren't in the book or my interpretation to get my way. I did that, and I got in touch with a gentleman, and he said, we're going to be out at the Blackfoot River Group, and we'll probably have dinner afterwards because that's what we do. We go to River City Grill. I said, all right, I'll be out there. And so, you know, I remember driving out. I had a car, like a good alcoholic. I had my car that had my name on it, that had a, you know, suspended license for drinking and driving. And then I had my other car that was registered to an LLC that they couldn't run my plates and figure out that a drunk driver is on the road. And so, but one is a Saturn and one is an Infiniti. I was like, well, I got to impress these people, so I'm going to drive the Infiniti. And I was driving out there, and Here We Go Again came on the radio, and I was just like, you know, I'm gonna do everything I can. I'm gonna give this a full go. I'm gonna put some actual willingness into this thing and see what happens, you know, because I already had the end planned. I was grieving. I couldn't find the light in the day. The end plan was what many of us have done, which is, you know, fight, or, you know, basically not fight to the bitter end, to let it consume me in a suicidal fashion. And so I went out there, we had a meeting. I don't remember who I don't remember what spoke, but I do still have the phone list of the men that were there. You know, it's funny because I can tell you exactly how many days it takes and how many meetings you have to go to wear a cover off one of these books. Because this is my new one. My other one still has that meeting schedule in it. So I said, okay, I'm gonna give this a shot. I'm gonna get a sponsor. I'm gonna work the steps, and when it doesn't work, I'm gonna make that old sacrifice. And you know, and one thing I went out there and I didn't hear bullshit. I didn't hear, you know, everything's gonna be okay. I heard, if you do the work, your life will change. And so started my sobriety journey, where I started to, you know, make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of this God as I understand him. And I started to meet with him, and I had, you know, basically was like, oh, okay, I'm already at one. came to believe, sure, this power called Holy Pickle can, yeah, HP, Holy Pickle, whoever built the pyramids, God, Buddha, Mother Earth, whatever you want to call it, whatever the spirit is. I was like, I'm going to try to turn everything over to this thing. And he made a suggestion that, that really helped in my early sobriety, which is after how it works, where it says, you know, we're trying to turn our will over to this God. What F do we do? You know, it says it a little bit differently in the book. It talks about a requirement, you know, which doesn't say very many things are required in there, but if the, you know, first requirement with that, we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And then reading it to the columns where it talks about the employer, talks about the actor, talks about these things of how we do this stuff. It resonated with me. And so I started to read that on a daily basis, probably just to make it cool that I was doing the work. You know, I'm a people pleaser, so I wanted you guys to like me. So I wanted you guys to think that I was doing this thing. So I carried a book with me to every meeting, and I started to read that book. And over time, it started to make a little bit of sense. And you know, and I did that for a while. I went to a lot of meetings in my first 90 days. Like probably close to 300. And it was easier to not drink in between meetings. So I went to a lot of them. Went to them in the morning, went to, you know, the Sunrise, the Zoo group, the No Name group, Band of Brothers on Wednesday nights at 6:30. Any men in the room? It's Wednesday night, 6:30 on Zoom. You can find it on Missoula website. It's a group of guys that, you know, small group of guys that work shit. And slowly I started to meet you guys, you know, started to get to know you. And it started to take hold. But, you know, when I got to that fourth step with my first sponsor and I started to write across, you know, who I was mad at, why, what part of self was affected in my role in it, I went left to right because he had never gone through the book. Had never gone through the, you know, so, it was a pivotal change in my sobriety when I went out with a ride in Dave's Z car. Him and I took a trip out there, and I said, I'm thinking of working with Eric. You know, him and I had talked about it at breakfast a month or two before, and Dave said, you know what, if you get the chance to work with Eric, you fucking take it. I think it was his exact words. And so I did. And so, you know, we started working with Eric, and you know, we went back to the first page, the preface of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and started reading. And we started meeting on a weekly basis. And we read the book, we read chapter by chapter. And, you know, it started to make more sense. And then we started on the steps. And, you know, when we got to that first step out of the 12 by 12, and I started, you know, it was, you know, what age, what happened, what were the consequences? For the first time in my life, I was able to kind of put together this narrative of what my life truly looked like, and allowed me to see that there were many times in my drinking career that there was that bad shit happened when I took a first drink. My first DUI, I was the designated driver. Yeah. You know, and that allowed, you know, for the first time, it started to make sense of how powerless I was over this disease. And, you know, and then we did the second step, and we got to the third step, and I was like, yeah, third step. I've been reading this fucker every day for like, you know, we just read it right out of the book. You know, we said the third step prayer, and then we went on to the fourth step. And that was the first time, you know, that in a way that was simple and easy enough for an alcoholic like me to understand that it wasn't about right and left to right. It was about writing top to bottom, column by column. First one on my list, Janine. You know, what happened? She went to the bitter end. She died. You know, what did it affect? All of them. You know, that was pretty easy. And then what my role in it was, you know, complacency, sloth, fear, you know, because I want to paint my picture like I did everything, and I did a lot. I did a lot as a full-time caregiver, but definitely alcoholism had its part. And, you know, and we did that. And then we did, fears, you know, we went through that same way, simple, column by column, meeting in between. And we went to, you know, sexual misconduct and harm done to others. You know, that was easy. I only ever had sex with anybody who would ever have sex with me. But and you know, but that harm done to others would later come up in the steps. And you know, when we set aside some time, like the book describes, for a long chat, and we went and had breakfast, and we read the fifth step out of the 12 by 12, and we took a drive up to the Lolo Pass, and we talked about, we did a thorough fifth step. And, you know, and I told him some things that I thought I would take to the grave and not tell anybody. And then, just like the book describes, it says, we go home, we wait an hour, we take our book from the shelf. So I had to put the book on a shelf. And, yeah, this is by the book, you know. And I read through my four step. I read through the first four proposals, as the book describes. And I was like, all right, you know, God, you know, this holy pickle, who I described it as early in the book, because I had to name it something other than Justin. And so I called it Holy Pickle, HP. And I said, you know, I now pray that you remove from me every single defective character stands in the way of my usefulness to you, my fellows. And I felt a little better. You know, I thought it would be, I keep thinking like these steps are going to be these huge watershed moments, and the rain's going to pour on me, and it's going to be like the movie. In my case, it doesn't seem like it didn't happen that way, but part of me, you know, changed that day. There's a watershed moment in my sobriety, like my sponsor describes. And then I started to make a list, and a lot of the same people that were on my fourth step were on my eighth step. And top of the list was Janine, and my parents, my step parents, and my you know, biological parents. They're both remarried. And, you know, there's a company, there's still one I got to do. There's a company that I stole from. There was my brothers, you know, there's people on that list I'm still getting to, but you know, I wrote it out, and then we talked about it. I had this mysterious third column. So he said, you know, write down what, you know, who it is, what you did, and then this mysterious third column. So we met a couple of times, and then he said, all right, that third column is for this, you know, next to your parents, you need to write soon. You know, next to your brother, you need to write soon. And in the meantime, they had closed my store, and corporate didn't think I was, you know, we needed a store in Missoula anymore. And so I had this free time on my hands. I'm like, you know, once the weather gets good, maybe April, end of May, you know, I'll go back to Washington. I'll see my folks. And it didn't work out that way. So I went over there. You know, I'm like, I have no reason not to go over there. My car can handle any snowstorm. I've got my dog, and so I went over there. You know, at the advice of someone special to me, and my sponsor, I got a hotel at my mom's house. So I was in town, so I could spend a couple days with her and a couple days with my dad, and I went and made amends. And it wasn't a, you know, the skies didn't part. They, you know, they're like mostly like, you know, no, you were pretty good. You know, you're a pretty good guy. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but you know, I need to make amends for my part in my selfishness, dishonesty, you know, self-seeking, inconsiderate behavior. And it was good. It was good. And then I drove back. And so I drove back, and granted, I got to listen to Joe and Charlie 1.5 times through on the way there. If you haven't done that, they map it out in a way that even an alcoholic like me can understand. And so, you know, anytime in my sobriety that I have trouble, I just go back to the next step or read the book. And I drove there, and then The next day I got a call from my dad. I was having coffee and he called me and he said, you know, son, I'm writing out this text message. Now it's 17 pages long, so I figured I better call you. And for the first time in my life, he said, you know, I really respect what you're doing, that you came all the way over here to make amends. You know, he has sponsees. He's in the program. He's taking people through the steps. You know, there's something about eyeball to eyeball in person, direct amends that I now understand why it says it that way in the book. And so to hear it from him, about what I'm doing in the program. He was lucky enough to come over last fall and meet some of you guys and have breakfast with us. And then that Wednesday, you know, that was great. So it went from good to great with him and my stepmom. And then my mom called me that Wednesday and said, I'm so happy to have my sober Justin back. And went from good to great. You know, she hadn't seen me since Janine died. The last time she saw me, she came into town and it was when car rental prices were really high. And I said, oh, don't fly into Kalispell and I'll meet you up there. Fly into Missoula and you can take my car. So I can drink the whole time on the way up there and the way back, you know, but I didn't tell them that, but they saw me, they witnessed what it was like for me to be drinking. And, something about, you know, my stepdad said, he's like, your mom seeing you, not just hearing about your sobriety, but seeing your sobriety is, it matters. It matters to make direct amends wherever possible. And it was possible for me to fly or to drive there and see them. And so I'm still working on that list, but you know, this step 10, you know, I read from the book a lot. You know, sometimes I'm smart enough to remember to take a nightly inventory, but I do read the 10th and 11th step every morning. A friend of mine from the Band of Brothers meeting at Wednesday at 6:30, talked about this thing called, you know, pages 83 to 89, and 2 paragraphs from 98 and 1 paragraph from 100. He said, I do this. This is what I experience. You know, I'm living a life, you know, I hear stories of my life's never been this good, you know, and then it gets better. But I read this stuff, I do this work. And so I started to do that, mostly because I wanted to say I could do it. And mostly because I wanted to be disciplined, like the book talks about. Us alcoholics are undisciplined, so this is a simple way that we allow God to discipline us. Fine, I can read in the morning. I remodeled the room that Janine passed away into a meditation room, laid flooring, painted, made it a Mediterranean blue color scheme, put a rug down, put an incense burner. And I can go in there and I can light an incense, look up at her picture, and read 83 to 89, 2 paragraphs from 98 and a paragraph from 100. And I do it because there's so many simple things in there. My friend Matt from my men's meeting told me, he said, you know, you don't have to believe this stuff, but just do it. You know, so when I go in the book, before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking. God, direct my thinking. Especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Divorce me from self-pity, dishonesty, or self-seeking motives. I didn't know how to pray when I got here. I knew your guys' prayers right out of the book. When I stop at the places it tells me to ask God for something and just ask God for something, even a simple guy like me can see it work. And it has changed my sobriety. You know, it has given me the ability to say that I do something, you know, 90 and 90, you know, I was day 83 and I was babysitting, and my sponsor at the time said, you know, I said, I'm going to miss a meeting for the first time. And, you know, but I've got all these ones in my back pocket. It's like, well, do you want to be able to say you did 90 and 90? I said, yeah. I said, you'd probably find an online meeting to go to. And I did. And, you know, I read that part though, because it's so simple. You know, I've also added the 3rd step prayer, the 7th step prayer, the St. Francis prayer, which is found on page 99 of the 12 by 12. Read those, And it allows me 15 minutes in the morning to think about my day, to give a little bit to God and give back a little bit to this program that's given so much to me. You know, I used to see people say that they lived a life worth living and say, that's fucking impossible for a guy like me. Can't you understand? I'm a grieving widow that doesn't have shit going for him. I got a pile of wreckage this high that I got to clean up. And day by day, it gets better. And but it allows me a little bit of time to direct my thinking, like the book describes, to relax and take it easy, which was impossible. You know, I came in with PTSD. I've done some other things like Rosen therapy, a lot of therapy, outside help. And I could not relax. My brain was going 100 miles an hour, and I only could talk 50 miles an hour. And for those of you guys that know me from early sobriety, yeah. Mary said it best. She's like, we just never knew what was going to come out of your mouth. And I was like, yeah, but you know, and so, you know, this program does work if you put some effort into it. You know, all these meetings, all this sharing, the reading, sponsorship is only 10% of the effort that I put into drinking, because I drank morning, noon, and night. I used to show up to the liquor store at 8 a.m. and then tell the girl at the liquor store, oh, I'm just getting all my errands done. You know, I'm such a go-getter that I have to be at the liquor store at 8 a.m. You know, as you slide the gate open, I'm just a go-getter. You know, what can I say? And that's all I wanted to do. And then somehow, some way, with the help of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, I'm so grateful. You know, congratulations on 90 days. It's a long time to go without a drink. And thank you for those that shared. Eric, thank you for introducing me. Yeah. And, you know, this is how wild life is. You know, I've since found love again. Yeah. And so I'm lucky enough to find a best friend in these rooms and someone that, you know, love again. And so, you know, I'm grateful for my friend Andy for being here. You know, we met a week before Janine died, and I just wanted somebody to hang out with. I'm like, hey, you know, you want to come over, play chess, go play poker? I'll pay for you, because I had nobody. And he's seen me, and then I can only imagine what went through his head when I'm like, I'm gonna get sober. You know, because that was like the furthest thing from the realm of possibility was me staying sober for 24 hours, let alone 652 in a row. And it's because of this program, because of my higher power, because of these steps. And it has been worth it. And it is, you know, when Janine died and I was sitting outside or sitting in, you know, my kitchen floor, crying by myself, I thought I was going to die. I thought Justin and Janine, the story of these two would never be told. I was going to die from alcoholism or suicide. And she was going to, you know, go into obscurity. And, you know, through me and through my story, she lives on. She's found everlasting life, like the 12 by 12 describes in St. Francis prayer. And it has been a journey. So if you're new, get a sponsor, work the steps, 90 meetings in 90 days, because we want to get to know you. And this program does work if you put 10% of effort into it. So thank you all for allowing me to share today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.